Working on their lunch, but I think we do have to get started with our program today. My name is Bob Coombe, and I'm the Chancellor of the University of Denver. And it is my great pleasure to welcome all of you today to this Fiscal Policy Summit at DU. I know a number of you are DU students and faculty and staff, but I also know that a number are from other institutions in the state and in the city. And for those of you who are coming from far away, welcome. Welcome to DU. Our speaker today is David Walker, who is the president and CEO of the Peter G. Peterson Foundation. He is very well known as one of the nation's leading authorities on fiscal policy and on the financial workings of our government. His knowledge comes from experience. For 10 years, he was the Comptroller General of the United States and the head of the GAO, and as such, the government's chief auditor. He has also served our country as a public trustee of Social Security and Medicare and as Assistant Secretary of Labor. There was an interesting article that appeared in the Wall Street Journal this past month about him. Some of you may have seen this. And it likened him to Paul Revere for his work, his writings, his words, for his leadership of the Fiscal Wake Up Tour. And of course, he is the star of the film IOUSA. However one may think of that comparison, one thing is certainly true. Like Paul Revere, he is a very great patriot. It is my honor to welcome today Mr. David Walker.
Thank you, Chancellor, very much for that kind introduction. Governor, other distinguished guests that are here, ladies and gentlemen. It's good to be back in Denver. Paul Revere talked about the fact that the British are coming. Well, the red ink is here, and it's getting worse rather than better. I know that you've heard this morning from a number of my colleagues talking to you about where we are and how we got here, and I'm going to talk to you about some possible cures, because I think America has now woken up. Most Americans now have seen that the too big to fail concept is false. Americans now know what a rainy day is. And as a result, they're starting to get more prudent with regard to their consumption, about their taking on debt, and they're actually starting to save. We've gone from virtually no savings to about 5 to 6% savings rate, which is still too low, but much better than it was in not too recent times. The problem is that while Americans get it, the federal government doesn't. The federal government is dissaving faster than they are saving. And while today's deficits are somewhat justified because of the economic recession, because of unprecedented challenges dealing with financial institutions, housing, etc., the real threat to our republic is not today's deficit and debt levels. It's the structural imbalances that we face between projected spending and revenues that were there before the recession, that are still there, but worse, and a tsunami of spending is headed towards our shores, and we are not prepared. And in fact, rather than taking steps to deal with that reality, Washington is wanting to grow government more and make more promises when it is already funded, has already made tens of trillions of dollars more in promises than it has funds to deliver on already. And hopefully you've already heard a little bit about that. $38 trillion for Medicare alone. Let me restate that. Medicare is in the hole $38 trillion, which makes Social Security's problem of $7.7 trillion seem very manageable, and in fact, it is. Before I go with the slides, let me just say a few provocative things. The greatest threat to the United States is not terrorism. It is not proliferation of nuclear weapons. and it is not climate change, although all of these are serious, and we need to do something about them. It is our own fiscal irresponsibility. A great nation cannot stay great if it can't put its finances in order and keep its economy strong. Our fiscal irresponsibility is a national security threat. It threatens our economic future. It threatens our strength and standing in the world. It threatens our national security over time, and it even threatens our domestic tranquility. Because when Americans realize that a larger and larger portion of the federal budget is going to have to pay for interest on the debt, for which you get nothing, and an increasing percentage of that, now a majority, goes to foreign lenders overseas, that is not something that they're going to take very kindly to. Now, if I can, let me talk to you about a way forward. Because there is hope. And yes, we can take steps to rise and meet this challenge. But it means that we have to make very tough choices. And the sooner the later, the better. Because as Albert Einstein said, the most powerful force on earth is not nuclear energy, it's the power of compounding. And when you're an investor, or you make tough decisions sooner rather than later, the power of compounding can work for you. But when you're a debtor, or you delay making inevitable decisions that you have to make, the power of compounding works against you. So let's get it working for us. The challenge is we have a dysfunctional democracy, a republic that is not representative of the public, and I'll come back to that. What is the way forward? When you're in a hole, the first thing you have to do is stop digging. The second rule of holes is when you're in a hole that's tens of trillions of dollars, you better figure out a plan to get out. And then thirdly, you better have some safeguards to keep from falling back in once you start to climb out. So it starts with tough statutory budget controls. Budget controls that we had in existence from during the 90s, during Bush 41, Clinton, and the early part of Bush 43, that helped us go from large and growing budget deficits to large and growing surpluses, but they expired at the end of 2002, and ever since then, Washington has been totally out of control. I'll come back to some more details. Social Security is easy. We have a president that plays basketball. This is a layup. It is not a slam dunk. You can miss a layup, but the odds are very good that you will be successful as long as you have a process that has integrity to lead towards a desirable outcome. We need to make that program solvent, sustainable, secure, and more savings-oriented, and the young people that are here, you will get Social Security. The question is, at what age, in what amount, in what form? But you will get it. Thirdly, we must reduce the rate of increase in health care cost and more efficiently target our taxpayers' subsidies and preferences for health care, because if there's one thing that will bankrupt the United States of America, it's out-of-control health care cost. We are the only country, a major industrialized nation, I should say, on the face of the earth that writes a blank check for health care. Nobody else is dumb enough to do that. Sweden, that has socialized medicine cradle to grave, which I'm not advocating. The United Kingdom, Canada, and other countries that have national health systems have budgets. They do not write blank checks because they know that health care is about more than money. It's also about life and death. And they know that without some type of financial controls and without some type of evidence-based practice standards that are administered by physicians, that things will spin out of control. And quite frankly, they already have in this country. There's two things that we spend twice per person what any other industrialized nation does. And yet we have below average outcomes. And what are they? Healthcare and K through 12 education. And higher education costs are spinning out of control. The business model for higher education is not sustainable either. We must control costs first. We also need to pursue comprehensive health care reform that addresses coverage, cost, quality, and personal responsibility. But let's be honest. You cannot reduce cost by increasing coverage. That is an oxymoron. Let me restate that. You cannot reduce cost by increasing coverage. If you increase coverage, it will cost more money, not less. Let me give you an analogy on our healthcare system today. Let's say that our healthcare system is a house, and we know we've had a housing crisis recently. If our healthcare system was a house, it would be a mansion built on a sinkhole of sand. The foundation is cracked, the plumbing leaks, the roof needs to be repaired, so it's structurally unsound, potentially headed for condemnation, and it's mortgaged for more than it's worth. So it's financially underwater. Rather than trying to fix up the house and figure out how we're going to be able to make our mortgage payments both today and tomorrow, we're going to add a new wing. And maybe we're going to pay for that wing over 10 years, but we're not sure that we're going to pay for it beyond that. But it's built out of the same flawed materials, attached to the same structurally unsound building, and associated with something that could get foreclosed on. I wouldn't call that progress. At the same point in time, there's no question in this country that we ought to have some level of universal coverage for preventative, wellness, and catastrophic care, with options for individuals to be able to achieve more than that, and I'll come back with a few more details. We've got to reform our tax system. It is mind-numbingly complex. It is difficult to comply with, and I'm a certified public accountant. It is almost impossible to enforce. It is a massive bait and switch effort as it relates to the alternative minimum tax. This year I paid 18% more in income taxes because all those deductions that I thought I was going to get, for including things like state and local taxes, and for the fact that I brought a hybrid car and I was told that I was going to get a tax credit for buying a hybrid car, because I pay alternative minimum tax, I got none of that and paid an 18% surtax on top of income tax. Now, I'm not a wealthy person. My boss is a billionaire. Believe me, I'm nowhere close. And so the fact of the matter is that our system lacks credibility. And it also is not generating enough revenues. We're way short today on having enough revenues to be able to pay our bills, and we're going to even get shorter over time if we don't start making some tough choices. And the fact is that some have said that all we need to do is think about raising taxes on people making over $250,000. If you believe that, I've got a bridge in New York that I'm happy to sell again. The fact of the matter is, our structural imbalance is so great that the burden is going to have to be shared broadly for one simple reason. And it's a simple but powerful word. It's called math. The math doesn't come close to working. And I'm here to tell you now, the longer we wait to reimpose tough statutory budget controls, to renegotiate the social contract for Social Security, Medicare, to be able to re-baseline spending and engage in tax reform, the longer we wait, the higher taxes are going to go for three reasons. Number one, math. Number two, demographics. More people will be enfranchised in existing entitlement programs, and it'll be difficult to make changes for those that are already in pay status. And number three, political activism. Not all segments of society are equally politically active. And I'm here to tell you, while young people were more active in this last presidential election than they have been in years, they weren't any more active than every other segment of the population. Young people, let me tell you, things are being done to you, not for you. What's happening right now is three things that represent a threat to your future and our future. We are mortgaging your future at record rates, and the mortgage is increasingly held by foreign lenders. Secondly, Because of the growth of entitlement programs and other mandatory spending, the discretionary investments in basic research, in critical infrastructure, and other things that can help improve the economy, grow the pie, are being cut. On a relative basis, they're going down. And thirdly, we will face increasing competition in today's world where geopolitical boundaries are of less and less significance all the time. That's called, in the South, a triple whammy. And we need to be able to start doing something about it. We've got to re-engineer the base of the federal government. Most of the federal government is based upon policies and programs that were put in place decades ago that may or may not have made sense when they were put into place, but they have not been modernized. They've not been subject to fundamental review and re-examination. Some of them just flat don't work. We're spending tremendous amount of money or losing a lot of money through tax preferences, and they flat don't work. Some of them are targeted too broadly rather than those truly in need. Some of them are duplicative and need to be consolidated. We must figure out how we're going to do this. And to accomplish all these objectives, quite frankly, you're not going to be able to do it the old-fashioned way. We're going to have extraordinary processes. When you have a range of extraordinary challenges, you need extraordinary processes. We're going to need a Fiscal Future Commission to be able to engage the American people, tell them the truth, come up with a package of recommendations for a vote on budget controls, Social Security, health care, and taxes. And we're probably going to need some type of a new type of Hoover Commission to relook at the base of government, what it does and how it goes about doing it, to engage in that transformation. And these are extraordinary things that will have to be able to have a process whereby Congress is required to vote on the results of this. And they can't punt any longer. Now, time does not allow me to cover all the details. My understanding, you've all been provided copies of what I have here, with the exception of 2 slides that I added, which I'll spend a little bit more about. But the bottom line is we have to have more truth and transparency about our financial reporting. Believe it or not, the federal government has something called trust funds. Put them in quotes. They're trust the government funds. You can't trust them, they're not funded. These are the funds for Social Security and Medicare. I was a trustee of Social Security and Medicare. The government takes any surplus funds every year and spends every single dime on other government expenses. Now, it does replace them with a government bond that can't be sold to anybody. Those bonds are reflected on computer runs that are in a locked file cabinet in West Virginia, and they involve trillions of dollars. And these bonds are backed by the full faith and credit of the United States government. They're guaranteed as the principal interest. They have legal, political, and moral significance. They have no economic significance whatsoever. But what's the real outrage is while the government will tell you you can count on these bonds and you can count on these trust funds, they're an asset, and they hold it out as an asset on the financial reporting for Social Security and Medicare. When you look at the financial statements of the United States government, they won't show it as a liability, because the left hand owes the right hand. Well, they're dead wrong. They took our money, they spent our money. It's a liability, and that, by not treating it that way, that means that deficits are worse than advertised, and it means that our debt to GDP ratios are worse than advertised, significantly worse than advertised. Our debt to GDP ratio right now on total debt is about 85% of GDP. Next year, it's going to be 95% of GDP. Well, let's benchmark that. At the beginning of the Republic in 1789, our debt was only 40% of GDP to win our independence, and that included assuming all the debts of the states in order to gain ratification of the Constitution. So total federal and state debt was 40% of GDP. We're at 85, headed to 95 in a year, and up beyond that. And what are we getting for this? And what do we get for the interest payments? This is another Southern word, shinola. Shinola, that's what we get. And yet, interest payments right now are significant, but frankly, nothing like what they will be if interest rates start heading up. Because interest rates are at about historic lows. And if interest rates start going up, and you can bet your bottom dollar they're going up when the economy turns around, And if foreign lenders lose confidence in our ability to put our financial house in order, there will be a risk premium. And if interest rates go up, that will set off a domino effect that frankly could be a lot worse than a recession. So we must send a message to Washington, Democrat, Republican, Independent, I don't care, I'm a political independent. We must send a wake-up call to Washington that in 2010, we have to put a process in place that will demonstrate to our foreign lenders that we're going to start putting our own financial house in order, that will put us in a position to tell the truth to the American people, that will set the table for a tough vote in Congress to be able to make a significant down payment on our $60+ trillion hole. $60+ trillion in liabilities and unfunded promises. Guess what? It's $10 trillion more than the total net worth of every American, including Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, my boss, and all other billionaires. $10 trillion more. You could confiscate the entire net worth of every American and you'd still be $10 trillion short for where we truly are from the standpoint of the federal government today. That's a lot of money. 12 zeros to the right of that 10. So we've got to reimpose tough budget controls, tougher than the ones that we had in the 90s because we're in worse shape. We've got to look beyond 10-year budget horizons. The country's going to last more than 10 years. Columbus proved a long time ago the earth is not flat. We need to quit following flat earth budget principles by thinking that we don't have to worry about beyond 10 years when, in fact, because of demographic trends and healthcare costs, things get a lot worse after 10 years. So we need to look beyond the horizon. We've got to be able to go back to pay-as-you-go rules. We've got to have discretionary spending caps. We need to reconsider mandatory spending programs and tax preferences. And we need to have limits on how much debt to GDP this country should have and sequesters, automatic triggers that will trigger spending cuts and or tax increases if those targets aren't hit. Washington is out of control. And it needs these budget controls not just to be able to provide financial discipline, but quite frankly to be able to say no. Because without these budget controls, and when people come up and say, I want this new entitlement, I want this new spending program, I want this new tax preference, they don't have a basis to say no. We need to also, I've already touched on this, we need to reform Social Security. It's easy. People who are currently retired or close to retirement, there'll be little to no changes for those individuals, with one possible exception. A modest reduction in the annual cost of living increase, when there is a cost of living increase. A modest adjustment, maybe 25 basis points, 0.25% or 0.5%, modest, so that everybody contributes something to a solution. But other than that, no benefit cuts. It's just a matter of what the rate of increase goes up for current seniors. The younger you are, the more you'll be affected because it'll be phased in. The wealthier you are, the more you'll be affected because you're better off. And what we need to do is to gradually increase the normal retirement age and early retirement age over about 20 years and index it to life expectancy to encourage people to work longer. We need to strengthen the benefit at the poverty level because too many people rely on Social Security solely for their retirement income. 22% of Americans rely on it solely for their retirement income. 35% of Americans rely on it for 90% or more of their income. And a majority of Americans rely on it for 50% or more of their retirement income. Never intended to be that way, but that's the way it is. And so it needs to be a base-defined benefit program because of certainty and security, indexed to some extent for inflation to protect against erosion of purchasing power. We don't need to increase the tax rate because that's a regressive tax, but we may have to increase the taxable wage-based cap, but not eliminate it. And we also need to think about modifying or reducing somewhat how much in benefits middle and upper income people get from Social Security, but not eliminate it. So not truly, totally means test it. Otherwise, that makes it a welfare program if you totally means test it. And if you do those things to a moderate degree, you will have a program that is solvent, sustainable, and secure indefinitely. And this time, let's don't use the 75-year flat earth theory. let's look at what's going to happen beyond that 75-year horizon and get it done right so we're not pre-programmed to have to come back. The Greenspan Commission didn't do that. We need to do it this time. Now, on top of that, we should have an automatic payroll deduction savings account, 2 or 3% of pay, that would come out of your pay off the top, go into a real trust fund with real investments, with real fiduciary responsibility and liabilities, where if the government touches your money, people go to jail. And we need to that will provide a pre-retirement death benefit. That will provide a supplemental retirement benefit. It'll help people understand the importance of savings, the miracle of compounding, and it'll help get our savings rate up, which is abysmally low because savings are the seed corn of the future. Healthcare. 4 tests for fiscally responsible healthcare reform. It must be deficit neutral over the first 10 years. It must not result in additional deficits beyond 10 years. It must result in a significant down payment in the tens of trillions of dollars in unfunded obligations we already have. And it must bend total health care cost as a percentage of the economy curve down, not up. People are talking about bending the curve in Washington. You need to add a word, down. We need to bend it down. And not all the bills bend it down. This is a high bar. If it's not met, it shouldn't happen. Because all we're doing is worsening our problem if the bar is not met. Now, ultimately, we need to move to some type of universal coverage for basic and essential care that's affordable and sustainable over time, probably preventative, wellness, catastrophic, with options for people to have more than that if they want. We need to implement federal budget controls and stabilizers with regard to health care. We need to change how we pay for health care to move away from fee-for-service towards capitation and other approaches. We need to look at what our taxpayer preferences are for health care. We need to look at taxpayer subsidies for middle and upper income Americans under Medicare. We need to employ evidence-based practice standards, which I'll come to that next, the next one. In other words, we need to know what works and what doesn't work. We need to pay for and encourage the things that work and not subsidize and pay for things that don't work. Physicians need to make decisions with regard to end-of-life care based upon what evidence says is likely to meaningfully improve or extend life. Death panels are an outrage. It's gross misrepresentation. It's an outrage to use that term. But every industrialized nation has physicians make decisions on whether or not to perform certain procedures and use certain techniques at end of life based upon the likelihood that it will improve or extend life when you have limited resources. You ought to be able to do whatever you want with your own money. That's none of the government's business. But when you're talking about taxpayer-financed systems, you need to consider evidence-based practices, and physicians are the ones that need to do that. We also, if we adopt national evidence-based practice, it'll help reduce litigation and defensive medicine because it would be a safe harbor against litigation risk. The biggest problem with regard to malpractice is not the suit, the cost of the suits, it's defensive medicine. It's the fact because people end up performing a lot more in order to minimize the chance of getting sued, and frankly, under our fee-for-service system, they get paid more money. The more you do, the more you get paid. The more you do, the less likely you're going to get sued, unless you mess up on something you do. And then last but certainly not least, and Colorado's better about this because you have such a beautiful environment here and you get a lot more exercise out here all times of the year. But the fact is we need to instill more personal responsibility than we have today for our own health and wellness. We're not only number one in cost in the United States per person, we have the highest obesity rate by far of any major country. And obesity is a leading indicator of heart disease, of joint problems, of diabetes. It's a problem, and we need to do something about it. These are a number of specific things that time doesn't allow me to go into. I've mentioned some of these already in my remarks, specific ideas that we ought to be thinking about with regard to health care reform. And for the most part, I'm here to tell you, Washington is punting and kicking the can down the road on the tough choices. The only reason that people are talking about costs right now is because President Obama rightfully has promised that he doesn't want to add to the deficit, at least for the next 10 years. If he hadn't made that promise, we wouldn't even be talking about cost. But the fact of the matter is, that's not enough. Paying for a new wing on a house that is structurally unsound and mortgaged for more than it's worth is not enough. That's too low a bar. We have to raise the bar because this could bankrupt America. Tax reform. We need more revenues. We need to fix the AMT. We need to decide which Bush tax cuts are going to be extended and which ones aren't. We need to streamline and simplify the tax structure to where we eliminate a lot of the deductions, exemptions, exclusions, and credits to keep rates as low as possible, to simplify it, to make sure decisions are made on sound economics rather than because of tax preferences. We need to be able to deal with the tax gap. We lose about $300 billion a year in revenues because people don't comply with the law. And the fact of the matter is, part of that is because of complexity. It's mind-numbingly complex, and part of it is because people are trying to evade the law, which is illegal, rather than engage in tax planning. We need to improve the competitiveness of our business tax structure, and we need to consider some type of a consumption tax, a progressive consumption tax, probably a value-added tax, that will possibly be dedicated to health care, because we're going to need more revenues for health care. We also need to make sure that we have a tax system that is competitive, credible, capable of being enforced and understood, and is one that generates an adequate amount of revenues to pay our bills and deliver on the promises that we intend to keep. We're way short now, and it's only going to get worse if we don't start making tough choices. So in summary, reimpose tough statutory budget controls, restructure existing social insurance programs and other entitlement programs, re-examine and restructure the base of other spending, review and revise our tax policy. We also need to make sure that the United States, for the first time since 1789, actually has a strategic plan, a strategic forward-looking plan that considers our trends and challenges, that considers what we need to do and where we want to be in the future, that has outcome-based metrics dealing with economic, safety, security, social, environmental issues, so that we can make sure that what we're doing from a spending, a tax policy, a regulatory, and other actions are actually resulting in positive outcomes, so that we can compare how we're doing against our goals, whether we're getting better or worse, and how we compare to comparator nations. Because when you do that, ladies and gentlemen, based on OECD statistics, the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, based in Paris, of which the U.S. is one of 30 member countries, we're below average on a number of key indicators. Below average on health, below average on public finance, below average with regard to K through 12 education. In order to know how you're doing, you have to know how you're doing against standards, are you getting better or worse, and how do you compare to your comparator group. You have to know all three. The United States is a great nation, but we're not as great as we think we are. We're number one in many things, but not all things, and we are below average in some very critical things. And that needs to be told to the American people, and we need to have a plan to do better. We can, we must, and I think hopefully we will do better. But you know, it's not just going to be what needs to be done, it's how we're going to need to get it done. We're going to need a new Fiscal Future Commission. We're going to probably need some type of Hoover-type commission that existed under the Truman administration. And we're also going to have to consider political reforms because we have a dysfunctional democracy. We need redistricting reform. We need campaign finance reform. And we probably need term limits. But much longer term limits than what the states have because they can be counterproductive. 12 to 18-year term limits. Our current system does not facilitate tough choices. Our current system results in all but 60 of 435 House members being in safe seats. which means that you not only have partisan battles, you have ideological divides, because the Democrat representative tends to be more liberal than the population and the Republican more conservative. America's in the sensible center. The solutions are in the sensible center. We don't need bipartisan solutions. We need nonpartisan solutions, because a plurality of Americans, depending upon which poll you go by, are now political independents, and that's going to grow. I've been in 45 states, doing town hall meetings, editorial boards, speeches to business and civic leaders, 45th this week. I'll cover the last 5 in the next 6 months. There is growing frustration. There is growing anger in America. Washington is out of touch and out of control. It is spending money that it doesn't have, and it hasn't gotten the message yet. And that's got to change. And it must change in 2010. And we're also going to need some constitutional amendments. Dealing with finance, we need a credit card limit. There needs to be a limit as to how much debt as a percentage of GDP this country can take on. We need to think about line item veto. We need to think about a number of other things that would require constitutional amendment, and some of the political reforms I talked about would clearly require constitutional amendments. Some of them wouldn't, but you would accelerate things if you had one. In summary, this is not just about numbers. It's about values and people. For values, I'll give you a word: stewardship. As leaders, we have a responsibility not just to generate positive results today, not just to leave things better off when we leave our jobs or this earth than when we came, but to leave things better positioned for the future. That is a long-standing American tradition. But my generation, the baby boom generation, is the first in the history of this country that is not delivering on that long-standing tradition. Whether it's fiscal, environmental, or others, this country is not better positioned for the future. There's still time to change that. And it's about people. And to me, it's about these 3 persons. These are my 3 grandchildren. I got married at 19. I've been married to the same woman for 38 years. We have 2 children and 3 grandchildren. They didn't create this problem, but it is their problem. They will pay the price. They will bear the burden. There is massive taxation without representation going on now. You know, it's easy to spend somebody else's money. It's even easier to spend somebody else's money when they're too young to vote and not even born yet. And that's what's going on today. And in order for things to change, young people are going to have to get with it. They're going to have to get more engaged and more involved. They're going to have to use social networking. We need a virtual march on Washington. We need to engage in activities to help make sure that your future will not continue to be mortgaged, that investments in your future will not continue to be cut, so that we can deliver on the American dream. And the American dream is not just for everybody to be able to have the ability to achieve their full God-given potential, but for each generation to be able to make sure that the next generation has a better life. And for the first time in the history of the United States, as of a year ago, a majority of Americans don't believe that will be the case. It doesn't have to be that way. But in order for it to change, the first 3 words in the Constitution are going to have to come alive. Who knows them? We the people. We the people are responsible and accountable for what does or does not happen. We are shareholders in a republic, the greatest republic in the history of mankind. Congress is the board. The executive branch, headed by the president, is management. And none of the 3 are doing a good job right now. None of the 3. All 3 need to do a better job. How many of you have seen IOUSA, the commercial documentary? If you haven't, go to the website IOUSAthemovie.com. You get 30 minutes for free. IOUSAthemovie.com. If that doesn't wake you up, I don't know what will. Unfortunately, the numbers are much worse now. So, we now have IOUSA Solutions coming in January. Patrick Creedon is here filming. He was the director on the first film. It's going to be a 25 to 30-minute piece. We're going to give it away. It's going to update the numbers, and it's going to talk about sensible solutions so that we can end up saving our future. And then coming on January 12th, 2010, published by Random House, is a book that I've just written, and I just sent it in last night. It's entitled Come Back America. It talks about how America has strayed from the principles and values that made it great and how we need to get back to those principles and values. It talks about a range of key sustainability challenges that we face as a country and what we need to do to get back on a more prudent and sustainable path. And it gives specific policy, operational, and political reforms that are necessary in order to help do so. And quite frankly, as Comptroller General of the United States, I could have never published this book. But it's coming out now. Stay tuned. Thank you for your time and attention, and I hope the rest of the day goes as well as the first part did this morning. Thank you very much. I'm going to be back this afternoon if people have questions, but we've got to go to the editorial board for the Denver Post. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, General Walker, and for that very sobering briefing. How many people in the room, if you had the chance, by the way, my name is Phil Smith. I'm the National Political Director for the Concord Coalition. How many people in the room, if you had the chance to get elected to Congress, thinks that maybe you could do a better job? Think that maybe you could be fiscally responsible on some of this legislation? Particularly after seeing that briefing. Well, guess what? You're going to have the chance today because the Concord Coalition, along with the Peter G. Peterson Foundation, is bringing our exercise, our nationally acclaimed exercise titled Principles and Priorities, right here to you today. And in order to lead that exercise, I'm pleased to bring forward Dr. Josh Gordon, the National Policy Director of the Concord Coalition, who for the next few minutes will be your de facto Speaker of the House. So please welcome Josh Gordon.
Okay, so we're going to do a few things a little different than how we normally do this exercise. We've been talking a lot about the long term, and so what I think we're going to do, normally we would go through a bunch of different categories of government spending and taxes and make the decisions in our groups about what we think would be the best for the country. Some of the options let you increase spending, some of the options let you cut spending, and the same thing on the tax side. What we're going to do is we're actually going to skip the first two sections, which involve what we normally think of as the domestic spending and the defense spending of the country, which are really annually appropriated. Congress spends a lot of time on these programs every year in Congress, and they never actually get to talking about taxes in any serious way or talking about entitlement programs in any serious way. So what we're going to do is we're going to skip the stuff that normally bogs down Congress and the stuff, honestly, that normally bogs down the groups that do this exercise. And we're going to jump right to the fundamental tax entitlement changes to see what can really affect the future budget deficit. All of these numbers are based on the next 10 years. So we're not really having a huge impact beyond 10 years. The amount of money you'll see on your workbooks are all 10-year numbers. And what we're going to do is each group at your table, what you should do, if you have 7 or more people at your table, you should break up into 2 groups. If you have 6 or less, you should work as one group. And what you'll do is you'll take the workbook and you'll go through the options starting in section 3 and do voting, see how each of these options come out. Write down a little yes next to the options that your group winds up voting for. And at the end, we're going to have you buzz in with the little clickers that are on your table, and we're going to be able to see on the computer screen what decisions each group made. So we'll be able to see what were the more popular decisions than others. To throw another little wrinkle into it, we've also given these clickers to a lot of the expert panelists that you've heard from. And at the end, we're going to compare how the experts make their decisions with the decisions that your groups are making. If you want a more extensive experience into this exercise, since we're kind of limited on time, next week we're going to be introducing the online interactive version of this game. It'll be called the Federal Budget Challenge, and you'll be able to get it from the Concord Coalition website, concordcoalition.org. You can go to the next10.org website. They're the organization in California that has helped us put together this. Or you can also go to the federalbudgetchallenge.org, federalbudgetchallenge.org. And you'll be able to enjoy the full exercise in the comforts of your own dorm room or apartment and see what choices you're willing to make and how that'll impact the future. So we're going to set up the computer for your clickers. In the meantime, you should just get started on page 9 and work through these options. If you have any questions about these options, each table has a more extensive options book that goes into a far greater detail about what changes the options you're voting on would make. You don't need to consult that book for every question. Most of the things are pretty self-explanatory. But if you need to, you can look at that thick options book and learn a little bit more about what you're voting for. So why don't you get started, and then at some point I'll bring you back to click in with your buzzers, and we'll see how everyone voted. So the experts and Concord Coalition staff will be walking around to answer any questions and to help you if you have questions about the options that you're trying to decide on. So good luck.
All right, I'm going to screw it in here. If you push it to the right, it looks like it sticks. It won't work because we need a barrel. It's a long, like 50-foot cord, so maybe. Yeah, definitely. There we go. All right. Let's try not to, yeah. I think it was,
That's fine.
cool.
It can't get more clear than that, huh? I guess it doesn't matter.
No. I can go look and see, but I think if it's 1024 by 768, that's probably the best.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
let me just say that if you finish sections 3 and 4, you can then go back and start on section 1 because we probably have a half hour left. So that just keep the time frame in your mind as you go through the choices. Thank you.